It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when Detective Michael Hargrove and Officer Jake Sullivan found themselves patrolling the bustling streets of downtown Atlanta. The summer sun bore down heavily, and the air shimmered with heat rising from the pavement. The city was alive with its usual rhythm, street vendors hawking their goods, the hum of passing cars, and pedestrians hurrying along with purpose. The two officers had been partners for years, sharing countless patrols, cases, and cups of coffee from their favorite corner diner. This particular shift, however, would be anything but routine. As they turned onto Peachtree Street, Michael's sharp eye caught a woman standing near a boutique. She was tall, poised, and dressed impeccably in a sleek black skirt paired with a white blouse. Her dark, radiant skin seemed to glow in the sunlight, and her demeanor exuded an air of confidence that was hard to ignore. Yet something about her presence seemed out of place. She wasn't browsing the shops or chatting with anyone. Instead, she appeared to be observing her surroundings intently, her eyes scanning the street like she was searching for something or someone. Jake nudged Michael. "She looks a bit too polished for this part of town, don't you think?" he remarked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Michael nodded, agreeing that her demeanor was unusual. While there was nothing overtly suspicious about her, years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts. People watching wasn't exactly a crime, but something about her precise movements and measured expressions piqued his interest. "Let's check it out," Michael said, steering their cruiser toward the curb. As they approached her, the woman didn't flinch or appear startled. In fact, she didn't even acknowledge their presence until they stepped out of the car and addressed her. "Afternoon, ma'am," Michael began in his usual polite but authoritative tone. "Everything all right here?" The woman turned her gaze toward them, her dark eyes calm and calculating. "Everything's fine, officer," she replied smoothly, her voice carrying an undeniable hint of refinement. "Just waiting on someone." Jake raised an eyebrow, glancing at Michael before stepping forward. "Mind if we ask who you're waiting for? You seem out of place, if you don't mind me saying." Her lips curved into a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I do mind, actually," she said, her tone still pleasant but firm. "I'm not obligated to answer that, am I?" Michael felt a flicker of unease at her composure. Most people would stumble over their words or try to justify themselves when questioned by the police. Not her. She stood there, unshaken, as though she had nothing to hide, or as though she knew something they didn't. "Just trying to make sure everything's safe around here," Michael pressed gently. "Would you mind showing some ID? Standard procedure." The woman hesitated for the briefest moment, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied the two officers. "Is there a specific reason you're asking for my ID, or is this just an assumption based on how I look?" she asked, her tone sharp now, cutting through the warm afternoon air. Jake frowned, his earlier curiosity now giving way to defensiveness. "We're just doing our job, ma'am. No need to make this personal." But the woman's calm demeanor didn't waver. She reached into her handbag slowly and deliberately, her movements deliberate enough to assure them she wasn't a threat. "Here," she said, handing Michael a small leather wallet. "You wanted ID, right?" Michael opened it, expecting to see a driver's license or maybe even some sort of professional badge. What he saw instead made his stomach drop and his heart race. There, staring back at him, was the unmistakable seal of the Central Intelligence Agency. The name on the badge read Amara Daniels, and her title, Special Agent. Jake peered over Michael's shoulder, and his jaw nearly hit the floor. "No way," he muttered under his breath. Amara tilted her head, her faint smile now tinged with amusement. "Is there a problem, officers?" she asked, her voice dripping with subtle irony. Michael quickly regained his composure, handing the badge back to her. "No problem at all, Agent Daniels," he said, his tone now significantly more respectful. "Just doing our due diligence." Amara took the badge and slipped it back into her bag. "I appreciate your diligence," she said smoothly. "But I'd suggest you be more careful about your assumptions in the future. Not everyone standing on a street corner is up to no good." With that, she gave them a curt nod and walked away, her heels kicking confidently against the pavement. Michael and Jake stood there, rooted in place, watching her disappear into the crowd. Neither of them said a word for several long moments, the weight of their mistake settling over them like a heavy cloud. Finally, Jake broke the silence. "What just happened?" Michael shook his head, still processing. "I think we just dodged a bullet," he muttered. "But I have a feeling this isn't the last we're gonna see of her." Little did they know, Amara Daniels was far more than just a CIA agent. She was on a covert mission that could change everything. And their brief encounter with her was only the beginning of a much larger, more dangerous story. Michael and Jake sat in the cruiser, the sound of the city around them barely registering as they replayed the brief encounter with Amara Daniels in their minds. Both of them had been in countless tense situations during their careers, but something about this left a lingering unease. It wasn't just the shock of discovering she was a CIA agent. It was the way she carried herself, like someone who was used to being underestimated and always 2 steps ahead. "Do you think she's really on our side?" Jake finally asked, breaking the silence. Michael glanced at him. "What kind of question is that?" "I mean, come on," Jake said, leaning back in his seat. "A CIA agent just hanging out on a random street corner. That doesn't scream normal to you." Michael sighed, gripping the steering wheel as he stared out the windshield. "Normal or not, she's way above our pay grade. You saw the badge. She's the real deal. But what's she doing here? Downtown Atlanta isn't exactly a hotbed for CIA operations." Michael didn't have an answer for that. The truth was, her presence raised more questions than it answered, and her parting words, "Be more careful about your assumptions," play on a loop in his head. It felt less like a warning and more like a challenge. As they drove through the city, Michael's thoughts drifted back to his time in the academy, where they'd been drilled on protocol and the importance of maintaining control in every situation. But nothing in his training had prepared him for someone like Amara Daniels. She wasn't just a mystery. She was a puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to solve. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that their paths were going to cross again, whether he liked it or not. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, Amara Daniels was already slipping into the next phase of her mission. She moved through the city with purpose, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. The man sitting too casually on a bench, the delivery truck parked at an odd angle, the subtle hum of a drone hovering just out of sight. To most people, these were mundane parts of the urban landscape, but to Amara, they were potential threats. Years of training had honed her instincts to a razor's edge, and today they told her she was being watched. Her mission briefing had been intentionally vague, standard procedure for high-level operations. All she knew was that a foreign intelligence operative had been detected in the area, and it was her job to track them down before they could disappear. The stakes were high, but that was nothing new for Amara. What unsettled her wasn't the mission itself. It was the nagging sense that something was off. The pieces didn't quite fit, and that usually meant trouble. She ducked into a quiet coffee shop, the scent of freshly brewed espresso mingling with the hum of conversation. Choosing a table near the back, she positioned herself with a clear view of the entrance. Pulling out her phone, she tapped into a secure channel and began reviewing the latest intel. The operative she was hunting was a ghost, someone with a reputation for slipping through the cracks. Amara wasn't easily rattled, but even she had to admit that this one would be a challenge. Her thoughts were interrupted by the barista bringing over a cup of coffee she hadn't ordered. "Compliments of the gentleman at the counter," the young woman said with a polite smile. Amara's eyes flicked toward the man in question. He was tall, well-dressed, and entirely unremarkable, except for the way he avoided making direct eye contact. Her instincts flared again, and she forced a smile as she accepted the coffee. The barista walked away, leaving Amara alone with her thoughts and the unwelcome gift. She didn't touch the coffee. Instead, she watched the man out of the corner of her eye, noting the way he checked his watch repeatedly and glanced at the door as though expecting someone. He wasn't local. His clothes were too tailored, his movements too precise. This wasn't a casual coffee break. He was here for a reason. Amara's hand drifted toward her bag, where a small device rested within easy reach. It looked like a pen, but in reality, it was a portable scanner designed to detect chemical compounds. She slid it discreetly toward the cup, pressing a hidden button. A moment later, the device vibrated softly, signaling that the coffee had been tampered with. Her lips tightened into a thin line. Someone was testing her, or trying to eliminate her. Either way, it confirmed what she already suspected. Her presence hadn't gone unnoticed. Back on the street, Michael and Jake were wrapping up their patrol when a call came through on the radio. A disturbance had been reported at a nearby warehouse, a fight between two groups that had escalated quickly. The dispatcher's tone carried an edge of urgency, and the two officers exchanged a glance before responding. When they arrived at the scene, the first thing they noticed was the eerie silence. The warehouse loomed ahead, its large metal doors slightly ajar. There were no sounds of a fight, no signs of the chaos the dispatcher had described. Michael's hand instinctively went to his holster as he approached the entrance, Jake following close behind. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of oil and machinery. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the stacks of crates and equipment. It looked abandoned, but Michael's gut told him otherwise. He motioned for Jake to stay close, their footsteps echoing softly as they moved deeper into the building. Then they saw it, a single chair placed in the center of an open space, illuminated by a lone overhead light. Sitting in the chair was a man, his hands tied behind his back and a gag in his mouth. He was alive but clearly terrified, his eyes darting frantically as he tried to warn them. Michael moved cautiously toward him, his every sense on high alert. "It's okay," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "We're here to help." But before he could take another step, a low, mechanical hum filled the air. He froze, his eyes scanning the room for the source of the sound. That's when he saw them, tiny, spider-like drones emerging from the shadows, their red lights blinking ominously. Jake swore under his breath, drawing his weapon. "What the hell are those things?" "I don't know," Michael replied, his voice tense. "But I don't think they're here to help." The drones began to move, circling the chair and the man tied to it. Their movements were unnervingly precise, like they were responding to some unseen command. Michael's mind raced as he tried to figure out what to do. They couldn't just leave the man, but stepping closer felt like walking into a trap. And then, out of the corner of his eye, Michael saw her. Amara Daniels slipping into the warehouse like a shadow. She moved with a quiet confidence, her gaze fixed on the scene before her. When their eyes met, she gave him a single nod, an unspoken signal that she was taking control. Michael didn't argue. Something told him that whatever was about to happen, Amara was their best shot at getting out of this alive. Amara raised her hand, signaling for Michael and Jake to stay back. Her movements were deliberate, her eyes fixed on the drones as they hovered and clicked in synchronized rhythm. There was no hesitation in her approach, only the sharp focus of someone who had faced similar dangers before. She didn't need to say a word. Her presence alone seemed to shift the balance in the room. Michael clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to call out. Jake stood frozen beside him, his grip tightening on his weapon as his gaze darted between Amara and the drones. "What is she doing?" Jake whispered, his voice low but edged with fear. "She knows what she's doing," Michael replied, though the words felt more like an attempt to convince himself. He watched as Amara reached into her jacket and pulled out a small handheld device, sleek and unrecognizable, but clearly designed for a purpose beyond their understanding. Amara pressed a button on the device, and a faint blue light illuminated the immediate area around her. The drones hesitated, their red lights flickering erratically as though they were recalibrating. It was enough of a distraction for Amara to make her next move. In a fluid motion, she crouched low and rolled behind a stack of crates, keeping herself hidden while still maintaining a clear view of the chair and the terrified man. Michael's heart pounded as he watched the scene unfold. He wanted to act, to do something, but every instinct told him that stepping in now would only make things worse. He could feel the tension radiating off Jake, who was visibly struggling to stay still. The man in the chair let out a muffled whimper, his eyes pleading for help. The sound drew the attention of the drones, which began to close in on him, their movements faster and more erratic. Amara acted quickly, activating her device again. This time, a high-pitched frequency emanated from it, causing the drones to jerk and spark as if they were short-circuiting. Now, Amara's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. Michael didn't need further instruction. He and Jake moved as one, rushing forward to grab the man and pull him out of the chair. The drones reacted immediately, their blinking lights intensifying as they shifted their focus to the two officers. Michael could feel the weight of their mechanical gaze, the red lights like laser pointers tracing their every move. "Get him out of here!" Amara shouted, stepping out from behind the crates. She raised a compact firearm, sleek and silent, and fired a series of precise shots at the drones. Each shot hit its mark, disabling the machines one by one. Sparks flew, and the remaining drones began to retreat, disappearing into the shadows like cornered predators. Michael and Jake dragged the man toward the entrance, their breaths coming in heavy bursts. The man's muffled cries grew louder as they moved, his fear palpable even without words. Michael glanced back just in time to see Amara take out the last of the drones. She didn't stop to admire her work. Instead, she turned and sprinted toward them, her expression unreadable but determined. Once they were outside, the tension in Michael's chest eased slightly. The cool night air felt like a relief after the oppressive atmosphere of the warehouse. They laid the man on the ground, carefully removing the gag and bindings. He gasped for air, his eyes wide with terror. "What's your name?" Michael asked, his voice firm but gentle. "Victor," the man stammered. "Victor Klein." "Why were you in there, Victor?" Amara's voice was calm but unyielding as she stepped closer. She towered over him, her presence as commanding as ever. "I don't know," Victor said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "They grabbed me off the street. Said I had something they needed, but I swear I don't know what they're talking about." Amara's gaze narrowed. "Who are they?" "I don't know," Victor pleaded. "They didn't say, just, they kept asking about some kind of file. Something called Project Sundown. But I've never heard of it before, I swear." Michael exchanged a glance with Jake, who looked just as confused as he felt. "Project Sundown," Michael repeated, turning to Amara. "What does that mean?" Amara didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at Victor, her expression unreadable. "You're sure you don't know anything about it?" Victor shook his head vehemently. "I'm just an accountant. I don't know anything about secret projects or whatever they're after." Amara's silence spoke volumes. Michael could see the gears turning in her mind, the way she was piecing things together while still keeping her conclusions to herself. It was infuriating, but he knew better than to push her. "We need to get him somewhere safe," Amara finally said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Whoever's behind this isn't going to stop until they get what they want." "And what about us?" Jake asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "We're in this now too. You think they're just going to forget about us?" Amara's gaze flicked to him, her expression softening ever so slightly. "No," she admitted. "But you're not alone. I'll make sure you're protected." Michael wanted to believe her, but the weight of the night's events made it hard to feel reassured. Still, there was something about Amara, something unshakable, that made him want to trust her, even if he didn't fully understand why. As they loaded Victor into the cruiser and prepared to leave the scene, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The name Project Sundown echoed in his mind, a puzzle piece he couldn't place but knew was important. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than anything he'd ever dealt with before. And somehow he knew that Amara Daniels was at the center of it all.